I thought I was marrying the love of my life, Chloe. I never imagined I'd be marrying into a family of narcissists whose entire fortune was built on a secret, a lie that involved my late grandfather. Her father, a real estate tycoon, wasn't just arrogant, he was a thief. At our rehearsal dinner, they didn't just insult me, they tried to erase the one person who gave them everything. They thought I was a quiet, simple guy they could walk all over. They were wrong. This isn't just a story about a canceled wedding. This is the story of how I took back my family's honor and watched their perfectly curated empire crumble into dust using nothing but the truth. If you've ever felt small, disrespected, or betrayed by a narcissist, this one's for you. It's funny how your life can be a beautiful handcrafted piece of furniture, something you've sanded and oiled and perfected for years, only to realize one of the legs was rotten from the start. For me, that realization didn't come with a quiet crack, but with a deafening, soul-shattering snap in a room full of people wearing $1,000 shoes, all of them staring at me. My name is Alex, and I'm a furniture designer. I work with wood, a material that's honest. It tells you its story through its grain, its knots, its imperfections. I find beauty in that honesty. For the last 4 years, I thought I'd found the same thing in Chloe. We met at a gallery opening in Austin, Texas. I was there showcasing a few of my pieces, and she walked in like a cool breeze on a blistering summer day. She had this way of looking at my work, not just as objects but as stories. She saw the passion in the dovetailed joints, the patience in the hand-rubbed finish. We fell in love between conversations about art, life, and the weird, wonderful soul of our city. When I proposed on the same pedestrian bridge over Lady Bird Lake where we had our third date, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. I wasn't just marrying Chloe. I was, in theory, joining the illustrious Montgomery family. Her father, Richard Montgomery, was a titan in Austin's cutthroat real estate world. Her mother, Eleanor, was the impeccably dressed, socially carnivorous queen to his king. They lived in a sprawling, minimalist mansion in the Westlake Hills that felt less like a home and more like a modern art museum, where the exhibits were afraid to be touched. From the beginning, I was a curiosity to them. A charming artisan, as Eleanor once called me at a cocktail party, her voice dripping with the kind of condescension that masquerades as a compliment. Richard would clap me on the shoulder a little too hard, his Rolex digging into my bone, and say things like, "Good to have a man who works with his hands in the family. Keeps us grounded, eh?" It was their way of putting me in a box labeled humble, quaint, and ultimately unimportant. And I brushed it off. I was in love with Chloe, and this was the price of admission. I told myself their world was just different from mine. My world was shaped by my grandfather, David. He wasn't a titan of industry, he was a titan of integrity. He was a structural architect, a quiet genius who believed that a building, like a person, should have a strong, honest core. He passed away 3 years ago, but his workshop, which I inherited, is still my sanctuary. The air still smells of cedar shavings and old books. He taught me everything. How to read the soul of a piece of wood, how to have patience, and most importantly, how to build things that last because they are built with purpose. He was my hero. And though I didn't know the full extent of it at the time, he was also the silent, uncredited architect of the Montgomery family's fortune. Years ago, long before the Austin skyline was a forest of glass and steel, Richard Montgomery was just a guy with ambition and a single risky project. It was called the Monarch Tower, and it was a bold, innovative design that no one thought could be built. The engineering was a nightmare. The support structure required a revolutionary new approach. Banks wouldn't touch it. That's when a mutual acquaintance introduced him to my grandfather. David saw the spark of potential in the project and in the young, hungry developer. He spent months in his workshop sketching, calculating, and innovating. He designed a unique lattice support system that made the entire structure possible. It was brilliant. It was his genius. Richard offered to pay him, but my grandfather, seeing a young family man trying to make his mark, waved it off. "Pay me a token fee for the materials. And when you're a success, just remember to give a hand up to the next guy," he'd told him. He co-signed on a crucial loan and handed over the blueprints. He never asked for a dime more, nor any public credit. That was just who he was. The Monarch Tower went up, became an iconic part of the city, and launched Richard Montgomery into the stratosphere. He never looked back. And he certainly never gave a hand up to anyone but himself. Chloe knew this story, in a vague, sanitized way. "Dad said your grandpa was a huge help in the early days. she'd mentioned once. She said it with the same casualness as if he'd helped her dad move a couch. The gravity of it, the sheer magnitude of the gift, was lost on her, buried under years of entitlement. This brings me to the psychological minefield that was my relationship with Chloe and her family. I was constantly being gaslit, and I didn't even have the vocabulary for it at the time. Whenever Richard made a snide remark about my little workshop and I'd mention it to Chloe later, she'd tilt her head and say, "Babe, you're being too sensitive." That's just his way of joking. When Eleanor would forget to invite my family to a small get-together, Chloe would explain it away. "Oh, Mom's so scatterbrained with these things, it wasn't intentional." I started to question my own reactions. Was I too sensitive? Was I the one with the chip on my shoulder? This is gaslighting 101, making the victim believe the problem is their perception of the abuse, not the abuse itself. Chloe was a classic case of codependency. Her sense of self-worth was completely entangled with her parents' approval. She couldn't and wouldn't stand up to them, because rocking the boat meant risking their validation, which was the air she breathed. Her loyalty wasn't to me, or to us, it was to the fragile piece of her family system, a system dominated by her father's narcissism. Richard Montgomery was a textbook narcissist. He had a grandiose sense of self, a bottomless need for admiration, and a complete lack of empathy. People were either tools to be used or obstacles to be removed. I, it turned out, was a tool that was about to become an obstacle. The wedding planning was where the cracks in my denial began to show. It was no longer our wedding, it was the Montgomery-hosted event of the social season. Eleanor vetoed every one of my suggestions. The rustic, intimate venue I loved was dreary. The food truck idea, a nod to how Chloe and I met, was tacky. Everything was replaced with something more expensive, more impersonal, more them. My one request, my one hill to die on, was to honor my grandfather. I have his original sketchbook, a beautiful leather-bound volume filled with his drawings, his notes, his philosophy. It's my most prized possession. I wanted to incorporate some of his design motifs into our wedding invitations, or have a small table with some of his architectural models on display. "Oh, honey," Chloe said, gently taking the sketchbook from my hands. "It's beautiful, really. But it's a little academic for a wedding, don't you think? It's so old-fashioned. Let's keep things modern and chic." She smiled, a perfect placating smile that made me feel foolish for even suggesting it. She didn't see the history or the soul. She saw something that didn't fit her mother's aesthetic. The rehearsal dinner was to be held at the Austin City Country Club, a place where the old money looked down on the new money, and everyone looked down on people like me. Richard and Eleanor insisted on hosting and controlling every detail, including a special tribute to the happy couple, a slideshow they had personally produced. Eleanor chirped when I asked what was in it. "We've dug up all sorts of wonderful old photos. It's going to be so much fun." A cold knot of dread formed in my stomach. In the hands of a narcissist, fun is often a synonym for humiliation. The night of the dinner, I felt like I was walking to my own execution. The room was a sea of pastel linen and quiet judgment. I saw my dad and my sister in a corner, looking deeply uncomfortable, like two stray cats at a dog show. I squeezed my dad's shoulder. "Just smile and nod," I whispered. "It'll be over in a few hours." After dinner, the lights dimmed. Richard stood up, beaming, and tapped a microphone. "And now for a little trip down memory lane that Eleanor and I have put together for our darling Chloe and her new fiancé, Alex." Even the pause felt like an insult. The slideshow started. The first few minutes were fine, cute pictures of Chloe as a little girl, riding ponies, winning tennis trophies. Then, it shifted to me. They'd asked me for photos, and I'd naively given them a few. They showed a picture of me, covered in sawdust in my grandpa's workshop. The caption underneath read, "Every artist needs his Garrett." A few polite, uncomfortable chuckles rippled through the room. Then came a photo of my small, modest childhood home. The caption, "Humble beginnings make for a strong character." It was a public declaration of my otherness, my lower status. My face grew hot. I glanced at Chloe. She was staring at the screen, her smile plastered on, tight and unnatural. She shot a quick glance at me, a silent plea for me to just endure it. And then it happened. The photo that broke me. It was a picture of my grandfather, David, standing proudly in front of the Monarch Tower's frame during its construction. He looked so happy, so full of purpose. And then Richard's voice, thick with smug satisfaction, narrated over the image. "And here's Alex's grandfather, David. A wonderful man, a real character. He was a self-taught draftsman, a tinkerer. He had all these charming little drawings and ideas." The screen changed. It was a high-resolution scan of a page from my grandfather's sacred sketchbook. It was his initial revolutionary design for the Monarch Tower's support system. I felt the air leave my lungs. And then came Richard's voice again, dripping with condescension. "He showed me this doodle once. A lovely but completely impractical idea. Of course, my engineers and I had to take this raw concept and turn it into something that would actually, stand up." He chuckled. "But we've always been grateful for his early enthusiasm. It's so important to encourage hobbyists." Hobbyist, doodle, tinkerer. The words hit me like physical blows. He wasn't just insulting my grandfather, he was actively, publicly, and maliciously rewriting history. He was stealing his genius, his legacy, and reducing him to a footnote in his own heroic story. In that moment, the entire room, the entire world, went silent. All I could hear was the frantic pounding of my own heart. I looked at Chloe. I needed her. I needed her to stand up, to say something, to stop the horror show. But she didn't. She just sat there, frozen, a tear glistening in her eye, but her mouth clamped shut. She looked at me, her expression a toxic cocktail of pity and panic, and she gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of her head. "Don't make a scene," her eyes screamed. And that's when I understood. This was my future. A lifetime of tiny surrenders. A lifetime of having my dignity, my history, and my soul sanded down bit by bit to keep her comfortable, to keep her parents happy. The leg of the beautiful table I'd built wasn't just rotten, it was infested. Something inside me didn't just snap, it vaporized. The part of me that made excuses, that accepted the gaslighting, that chose peace over self-respect was gone. In its place was a cold, clear certainty. I stood up. My chair scraped against the polished floor, a sound as loud as a gunshot in the silent room. Every head turned towards me. Richard stopped talking, his smug smile faltering. "Excuse me," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the thick, suffocating air like a chisel through soft pine. I walked to the front of the room, took the microphone from Richard's stunned hand, and faced the crowd. "That's an interesting story, Richard," I said, my eyes locking onto his. "But it's not the true one." I could feel Chloe's stare burning into my back. I could hear her whispering, "Alex, no, please." I ignored her. I was finally establishing a boundary, not with a request but with a wall of fire. "You see," I continued, my voice gaining strength, "my grandfather wasn't a hobbyist, yet he was a brilliant architect. And that doodle you're talking about wasn't an impractical idea. It was the blueprint that made the Monarch Tower possible. The blueprint he gave you out of the goodness of his heart. The blueprint that built your entire empire." A wave of murmurs swept the room. Richard's face, which was usually a healthy tan, had turned a pasty, blotchy white. "He didn't just give you an idea," I said, turning to address his business partners and high society friends. "He co-signed your loan when no one would touch you. He saved your dream. He didn't ask for credit or money. He asked you to remember to help the next person up. It seems you forgot that part." Turned and looked directly at Chloe. Her face was a mask of horror. The tears were flowing freely now. "I love you," I said to her, and I meant it. "But I can't marry into a family that builds its fortune on a lie and then mocks the memory of the man they owe everything to. And I cannot, and will not, be with someone who would sit there and let them." I placed the microphone carefully on the lectern. "The wedding is off." I turned and walked towards the door, not looking back. I could hear Eleanor letting out a theatrical gasp. I could hear Richard sputtering my name. But the only sound that mattered was the sound of my father and my sister pushing their chairs back and following me out into the cool, clean night air. As the heavy club door closed behind me, I felt a profound sense of loss, but underneath it, for the first time in a very long time, I felt the solid, unshakable foundation of my own self-respect. The drive home was silent. My sister kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror, her expression a mix of shock and fierce pride. My dad just stared out the window, but when we pulled up to my apartment, he put a heavy hand on my shoulder. "David would be so damn proud of you, son," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "So did the right thing." I knew I had, but the adrenaline was fading, replaced by a hollow, aching void. The life I'd planned was gone. I walked into my apartment and was immediately hit by the ghost of Chloe. Her favorite throw blanket was on the couch, her mug was by the sink, a book she was reading lay on the coffee table. I collapsed onto the sofa, the silence of the room roaring in my ears. Then my phone started. It was a digital siege, a relentless barrage of texts and missed calls. "Chloe, Michael, please, we need to talk. This is a misunderstanding." "You don't understand. Chloe, my parents are furious. You humiliated them. You humiliated me. Chloe, I love you. Please don't throw this away. We can fix it. Richard, you have made a grave mistake. You will regret embarrassing me like this. I will make sure of it. Eleanor, I cannot believe your cruelty. To do this to our family, to our Chloe, after everything we have done for you. You are an ungrateful, dramatic boy." They were a masterclass in narcissistic deflection and gaslighting. I was the cruel one. I was the one who was dramatic. I was the one who had made a mistake. There was no apology, no glimmer of remorse. Just anger that I had dared to pull back the curtain and expose the pathetic little man behind it. I turned my phone off. A few days of radio silence passed. I canceled vendors, spoke with the caterers, and began the painful process of dismantling a future. Then, one afternoon there was a knock on my door. It was Chloe. She looked terrible. Her eyes were swollen, her clothes were rumpled, and she was clutching a small box. "I'm here to give you this back," she said, holding out the engagement ring. Her voice was flat, defeated. I took the box and set it on a table, leaving the door open. "Okay," I said. I wasn't going to make this easy for her. "Can I come in?" she asked. "Just for a minute." I hesitated, then stepped aside. This was the moment I'd been dreading and in a way waiting for. This was her chance to show me I was wrong, to prove she understood. She stood in the middle of my living room, wringing her hands. What they did was wrong, Alex," she began. "My dad, he gets carried away. He was trying to be funny, to tell a good story, and it came out all wrong." I just stared at her. "Trying to be funny?" "He didn't just tell a bad joke, Chloe. He maliciously lied. He stole my grandfather's legacy in front of a room full of his peers to make himself look bigger." "I know, but you don't know him like I do," she cried, her voice cracking. "This is the classic defense of an enabler. He's under so much pressure. That project, it made him. He's sensitive about it. Sensitive." I let out a bitter laugh. "He's not sensitive, Chloe. He's a thief and a narcissist, and you defended him. You sat there and chose his fragile ego over my family's honor, over my honor. What was I supposed to do?" she shot back, her grief turning to anger. "Stand up and call my own father a liar in front of everyone? Ruin my own rehearsal dinner?" "Yes," I said, my voice rising. "Or at the very least you were supposed to stand with me, not against me. A partner would have walked out of that room with me." Her face crumbled. The fight went out of her, replaced by a desperate plea. "Please, Alex, we can go to therapy. I'll talk to them. I'll make them apologize. We can still fix this." And that's when the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. She still didn't get it. She thought this was something an apology could fix, like a broken vase that could be glued back together. She didn't understand that the material itself was flawed. The foundation was corrupt. This wasn't a crack in our relationship. It was a revelation of what our relationship truly was. "There's nothing to fix, Chloe," I said, my voice softening with a sad finality. "This is over." She left in a storm of tears. After she was gone, a thought nagged it at me. My grandfather's sketchbook. I had lent it to her a few weeks before. She'd said she wanted to finally try and understand his work, a gesture that had touched me at the time. She dropped it off while I was out, leaving it on my workbench. I'd been so consumed by the drama that I hadn't even looked at it. I walked into my workshop, the smell of wood and varnish a familiar comfort. The sketchbook was sitting right where she'd left it. I picked it up, the worn leather cool beneath my fingers. I opened it, and my blood ran cold. Pages were missing. Not just any pages. The key pages. The ones detailing the specific calculations for the lattice support system. The schematics with my grandfather's signature annotations. The very heart of his innovation for the Monarch Tower. All torn out, the ragged edges a violent scar in the book. The whole thing crashed down on me with sickening clarity. The slideshow wasn't just a spontaneous, cruel jab. It was premeditated. The request to borrow the sketchbook wasn't about understanding me. It was a reconnaissance mission. They needed to know what proof I had. Richard was likely planning a new development, wanting to reuse my grandfather's uncredited, and therefore free, brilliant design. The public humiliation was a power play, designed to discredit my grandfather's work and paint me as an oversensitive fool if I ever tried to bring it up. They weren't just insulting a dead man's memory, they were trying to rob his grave. This was the ultimate betrayal. It went beyond disrespect. It was a calculated, cold-blooded conspiracy to erase my family's history for financial gain. The rage that filled me was pure and clean. It burned away all the grief and left behind a diamond-hard resolve. They thought I was a simple woodworker. They thought I would just get angry, yell, and eventually crawl away defeated. They had fundamentally misunderstood who my grandfather had raised me to be. He taught me to build things, and now I was going to build a cage of truth and lock them inside it. I wasn't going to sue them. A lawsuit would be a messy, years-long battle that they, with their army of lawyers, would likely win. It would be my word against a real estate tycoon's. No, my grandfather's weapon was his mind, his integrity. Mine would be too. I spent the next 2 weeks in a creative frenzy. I gathered everything I had, the remaining pages of the sketchbook, my grandfather's personal letters where he described the project, his daily journals from that year, and the few preliminary blueprints he had kept copies of. I didn't have the final stolen schematics, but I had more than enough to tell the story. I didn't call a lawyer. I called a journalist I knew, a woman at a prestigious architectural magazine known for her long-form investigative pieces. I didn't pitch a takedown piece. I pitched a tribute, a story of a forgotten genius. The article was published a month later. The title was The Unsung Architect: How David Miller's Genius Quietly Shaped the Austin Skyline. It was beautiful. It was a meticulously researched, deeply respectful profile of my grandfather. It featured high-resolution images of his elegant designs from the sketchbook. It quoted his eloquent, humble letters. It laid out the timeline of the Monarch Tower's construction, presenting the undeniable evidence of his contribution. It didn't mention Richard Montgomery by name in a negative light. It didn't have to. It simply told the truth, positioning David Miller as the visionary and Richard Montgomery as the man who was lucky enough to be in the room. In the world of architecture and design, where legacy and intellectual honesty are currency, the article was a nuclear bomb. The fallout was immediate and glorious. The local news picked it up. The Austin Architectural Guild posthumously awarded my grandfather a Medal of Honor. His name was suddenly everywhere. The story of the hobbyist had been replaced by the legend of the visionary. For Richard Montgomery, it was a public execution of the one thing he cared about: his image. He was no longer the self-made tycoon. He was the man who built his empire on the uncredited work of a better man. Business partners looked at him differently. At charity galas, people would whisper as he and Eleanor walked by. They hadn't lost their money, but they had lost their status. They were a joke. To a narcissist, there is no greater punishment. The final act came a week after the article was published. Chloe showed up at my workshop, not my apartment. She looked angry, not sad. "Are you happy now?" she spat, her voice shaking with rage. "You've ruined them. You've ruined my family." I was sanding a piece of reclaimed walnut, and I didn't stop. The rhythmic motion was calming. "I didn't ruin them, Chloe. I just told the truth. Their reputation was as poorly constructed as their lies. It was bound to collapse." "You did it to hurt me," she accused. I finally stopped sanding and looked at her, truly looked at her. The woman I loved was gone, and in her place was a stranger, a gatekeeper for her parents' toxic legacy. "I know," I said, my voice calm and even. "I did it to honor him. You all left me no choice. You tried to erase him. I made sure he would be remembered forever. That was the last time I ever saw her. Today my life is quiet, and it is honest. I run my own design firm, Miller & Son, even though I'm the only one here. It's a tribute to him. I incorporate his design principles into every piece I make. The article about him is framed on my workshop wall. Sometimes when I'm working late, I feel his presence, a quiet approval in the silent, sawdust-filled air. I didn't get the wife or the life I thought I wanted, but I got something far more valuable. I reclaimed my family's honor. I learned to recognize the difference between love and manipulation. And I learned that the strongest structures, whether they're made of steel or of spirit, are the ones built on a foundation of truth. I am no longer a man who lets others define his worth. I am a man who builds it himself, with his own 2 hands, out of honest, solid wood. And it is beautiful. If you enjoyed this video or found it helpful, go ahead and give it a like. It really helps me out. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any future videos. Thanks a bunch.